play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is November 6th, 2025. It is 6:39 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. SCOTUS removal fight. Copyright Office. The Justice Department asked the Supreme Court to allow the president to remove the Register of Copyrights after a lower court temporarily reinstated her. A fast-moving separation of powers test that would expand presidential removal authority and weaken protections for independent agency officials if granted. SNAP litigation judge orders full benefits. A federal judge in Rhode Island ordered the administration to fully fund November SNAP benefits for 42 million Americans, rejecting a plan for partial payments and directing use of tariff-derived contingency funds. A decision the administration has appealed. This is an urgent humanitarian and legal enforcement matter. Courts are treating benefits interruptions as causing irreparable harm. Administration messaging as coercion. Reporting shows the administration publicly tied benefit disbursements to the broader funding shutdown standoff. Judges and advocates characterize such linkage as coercive and legally vulnerable. Expect rapid follow-up compliance filings and enforcement motions. National Guard Quick Reaction Forces directed for crowd control. Pentagon memos directed states and territories to form quick reaction guard units trained for civil disturbance, crowd control missions, tens of thousands of troops nationwide, operational timeline into 2026. Civil liberties groups, some governors, and veterans organizations warn this operationalizes a federalized rapid response capability and risks militarizing responses to protests and political dissent. Treat this as an active structural mobilization rather than mere rhetoric. Judicial limits on deployments remain active. Federal judges have issued injunctions in some jurisdictions, example Portland, blocking or limiting Guard and federal deployments. Litigation continues to be the principal check on rapid federalized use of force. Pull the legal dockets for operational details if you would like more information. That would be ROE, units, and timelines. Threats and coercive legal posture towards civilians and politicians. The administration's public statements linking SNAP and other services to political outcomes and threats or implied threats to remove officials or reassign federal resources for political ends are being litigated and framed by opponents as coercive uses of executive power. These tactics have direct human safety implications. Expansion of presidential removal power, if SCOTUS grants relief, would erode statutory safeguards for independent agencies and make regulatory enforcement more politically pliable, a structural risk to consumer protections, public health, rulemaking, and administrative accountability. That is in regards to the firing of the head of the Copyright Office. Federal centralization of domestic crowd control capacity. Quick reaction. Guard reduces state and local autonomy and raises urgent oversight questions, rules of engagement, medical care, detainee handling, and transparency. Those operational changes increase the risk of rights violations during protests and politically charged events. Service delivery erosion from funding standoffs, court fights, and partial payment schemes for SNAP are producing immediate harms to households and will cascade into food bank overload, school nutrition gaps, and greater public health vulnerabilities if not resolved swiftly. Food security. The SNAP court order is time sensitive. If implementation lags, millions face reduced benefits for the month. The states and food banks are already reporting increased demand. This is a frontline consumer welfare story. Local infrastructure stresses. With emergency resources being shifted, e.g. hurricane aid commitments, and Guard organizations expect localized utility and hospital stress in some counties. Check county EM and utility outage trackers for immediate impacts. No single nationwide outage event reported in the last 24 hours, but micro outages and localized ER strains are more common under the current resource pressures. No new national public health emergency announced in the last 24 hours, but the SNAP disruption and potential cuts to public health reimbursements tied to shutdown and funding fights pose real risks to surge capacity in vulnerable areas. Local DPH pages remain the fastest source for outbreak or hospital capacity alerts. Nuclear testing directive, strategic shock, reporting earlier this period shows the president ordered the Pentagon to resume the process of testing U.S. nuclear weapons after a 33-year moratorium. Officials have not provided clear technical detail, e.g. explosive versus subcritical versus readiness activities. This directive is a major geopolitical shift that will prompt allied concern, arms control fallout, and urgent oversight questions about notification and legality. SCOTUS emergency petition on the Copyright Office has been filed. Constitutional removal power is the issue. SNAP litigation, federal judges ordered full November benefits. The administration appealed. Compliance filings and potential contempt proceedings are expected. This is an active enforcement docket with immediate human consequences. Deployment litigation, plaintiffs and cities continue to secure injunctions limiting Guard and federal deployments in particular jurisdictions. Portland, for example. These dockets will be key to revealing operational plans and ROE. Federal judge orders the administration to fully fund the SNAP benefits for November for 42 million recipients. That's what happened today. Pentagon directed quick reaction. National Guard units for crowd control are being stood up. Tens of thousands of nationwide planned. The president ordered the Pentagon to restart U.S. nuclear weapons testing processes, major diplomatic and legal implications. I certainly find it concerning, and I'm very worried he's going to try to bomb Americans. No newly verified allegations of lewd conduct. However, the Great Gatsby party by the president I would definitely consider to be lewd conduct. Federal Judge John J. McConnell ordered the administration to fully fund November's SNAP benefits. Undirected use of tariff-derived contingency funds, the administration has appealed. Why it matters, this is a live enforcement fight with immediate human security consequences. 42 million recipients. The appeal and any compliance lag create documentary opportunities. USDA, DOJ filings, Treasury and tariff fund accounting. This is according to Reuters. State attorneys general move publicly and file supporting complaints and press actions with SNAP enforcement. Multiple state AGs, example Washington AG Nick Brown, released statements and filings celebrating the ruling and signaling coordinated state-level pressure and potential follow-on litigation or enforcement actions. California's AG complaint PDF is already in public docket. Why it matters, state AG filings often include affidavits and internal documents that reveal federal decision timelines and rationales. Excellent for FOIA and records requests and subpoena leads. On the ground, food bank surge and community drives in border and rural hotspots. What happened? Local reporting, Laredo and other places, shows increased lines and urgent food drives as SNAP pauses and partial payments stress community food systems. National hunger relief groups also reported spikes. Why it matters, human impact, reporting photographs, interviews, food bank, and inventory logs will document immediate consequences of federal policy and support rapid follow-up on whether court orders translate into relief on the ground. Measles outbreak growth, CDC update and localized clusters, Utah and Arizona corridor. CDC data through November 4th lists 1,681 confirmed measles cases nationwide. State updates show clusters along Utah-Arizona border are rising. They are at 158 cases in that area. Public health surge risk converges with SNAP and food insecurity and hospital capacity strains. County DPH exposure site lists and school exclusion orders are immediate local levers for reporting. Pentagon Quick Reaction Guard memo remains operational. Look for state adjutants, general replies, and procurement records. The Pentagon directive to stand up Guard Quick Reaction Units, civil disturbance and crowd control focus, continues to generate state-level responses. Several outlets flagged the memo last week, and states are replying with implementation notes. State replies, training schedules, contract requests for less lethal gear, and ROE drafts will show how far the program will be pushed and which tools will be deployed. Critical for civil liberties oversight, pull State Adjutant General emails and DoD procurement notices for further information. Procurement and less lethal weapons demand contracting signals, market and procurement traces show rising demand and contracting for less lethal crowd control gear. Longer-term trend with fresh contract notices appearing recently. Why it matters contract awards, GAO procurements and bid protest filings reveal suppliers, equipment specs, and possible escalation of capabilities sent to the field. Those records are FOIA and GAO request targets. Local hospital closure and capacity pressure signals rural vulnerability. National trackers and GAO Becker's reporting show ongoing small hospital ER closures and fragile rural hospital finances. Recent updates flag additional at-risk facilities and ER service changes. Combined with infectious disease clusters and SNAP disruption, even a few local ER closures can create acute access gaps. Hospital board minutes, county EMS call volumes, and state hospital regulators' filings are immediate records to pull for further information. Geopolitical shock, ambiguous nuclear testing, order still reverberates diplomatic and market ripples. The president's directive to restart the process of testing nuclear weapons continues to prompt international responses. Putin ordered reviews and raised questions from allies. Reporting and analysis pieces are appearing overnight. Beyond the obvious strategic risk, legal notification records and an U.S.A. DoD memos, for example, congressional notifications, and budget and training taskings will show how the order is being operationalized. A high public priority on public records to target. Today, the stock market closed with the S&P 500 at $670.31, down 1.09%. That is a substantial loss. The Dow Jones down to $469.28. That is a decrease of 0.81%. Invesco QQQ down 1.90%. That is at $611.67. This is a substantial loss for the stock market. And what I have been seeing is it's like when it loses money, it regains that money. Well, this time, I don't think it's going to make up those losses. Here is a visual on today's market performance. This is the S&P 500. This is the Dow Jones. And this is Invesco QQQ. I am having difficulty speaking today. Here are the top economic news highlights for the past 24 hours. Services sector uptick while manufacturing remains weak. The American Chemistry Council reports that the manufacturing PMI for October declined to 48.7%, below 50, equals contraction, meaning manufacturing activity continues to shrink. At the same time, the services PMI rose to 52.4%. From 50 last month, led by news orders and export orders. Why it matters, this bifurcation, what does that word mean? Bifurcation. Bifurcation, bifurcation, the division of something into two branches or parts. This bifurcation suggests that while services each dominate U.S. economic activity and are holding up, manufacturing, which is more trade and export sensitive, is under real stress. For trade and economics reporters, this raises questions about global competition, import and export dynamics, supply chain disruption, and employment. Implication: weak manufacturing plus contracting export orders may suppress U.S. export growth. Policymakers should watch impacts on trade deficits, regional manufacturing, employment, and supply chain resilience. Private payroll rebound, but job cuts remain large. According to the same ACC report, the ADP Private payroll proxy showed employment rose by 42,000 in October after a loss of 29,000 in September in the private sector. But at the same time, hiring remains modest and job cuts announcements were very high. See other reporting. Why it matters, though there is a positive sign in private employment, the environment remains fragile. Large job cut announcements and weak hiring in key sectors suggest structural risks. For trade and economic analysis, weak hiring and manufacturing contraction can reduce consumer demand, pressure imports, and hurt trade balances. Implication: with employment not robust, consumer spending may slow, reducing imports, trade policy cannot be isolated from labor market dynamics. Economic resilience lifts markets but also raises questions about future rate cuts. A Reuters report highlighted that U.S. stocks and bond yields rose following surprisingly strong services and private payroll data, indicating more resilience than many expected, but the same report notes this calls into question how much the Federal Reserve still needs to cut interest rates. Why it matters: trade and economic policy and markets intersect. When the economy shows resilience, trade deficits may widen via stronger import growth, and interest rate policy becomes more complex. For economic reporting, watch how trade flows and capital flows respond. Implication: if the Fed delays rate cuts, U.S. interest rates remain higher for longer, which tends to strengthen the dollar, reduce exports, increase the trade deficit, and raise pressure on U.S. manufacturing exporters. Job cut announcements surge, especially in tech and manufacturing. According to coverage via MarketWatch and Investopedia, employers announced 153,074 job cuts in October, the largest for that month since 2003. Tech, manufacturing, and large employers are among the biggest contributors. Job cuts, especially in export and trade-sensitive industries, manufacturing and tech hardware, for example, create downstream trade effects. Reduced employment equals lower income equals weaker consumer spending, which leads to less import demand, and globally, U.S. demand dips, and this affects trade partners. This is a red flag for U.S. trade-linked sectors. Reporters should check layoffs by region, industry, export impact, and state and local employment effects. Also check how the administration's trade policies or tariffs are affecting these layoffs. Despite pockets of strength, services growth, private employment rise, the overall economic picture remains mixed. Manufacturing contraction, large job cut announcements, and export order declines raise trade and economic risks. The resilience signaled by some data is boosting markets, but also increasing policy uncertainty about interest rates and trade flows. From an accountability and public safety lens, the trade dimension remains crucial. Weaker manufacturing and export orders means jobs and communities are at risk, and policies, tariffs, and trade agreements will matter. The labor market vulnerabilities feed directly into consumption and trade flows. Reduced consumer demand could hurt imports, depress trade partners, and strain domestic producers. The administration's trade and industrial policy needs scrutiny. Are trade deficits rising? Are manufacturing regions being supported? What role do tariff and trade agreements play in the weak export order backdrop? Which, by the way, every state has its own Fed. So if he's going to mess with the Fed, we could possibly be able to add up the numbers between all of the state level Feds and see what we get for a total number. With the government shutdown continuing, which delays key data releases and complicates policy responses, transparency is reduced and reporting access is lower. This raises public safety and accountability concerns. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that people are thriving, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. And here is the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. Northeast and mid-Atlantic mild conditions with mostly dry skies, highs in the upper 60s to low 70s. Overnight lows dipping into the 40s. Keep an eye out for potential of frost and black ice on rural roads and bridges if overnight temperatures fall further than expected. Early morning commuters should be alert for slick spots where temperatures near freezing overnight. Outlook for the southeast and Gulf Coast, stable, warm, and mostly dry, highs around 70. Overnight lows in the 50s. Keep an eye out for fog. There's going to be some patchy fog in low-lying coastal areas or near marsh and estuarine zones overnight and into the morning. Reduce speed and watch for visibility drop. Midwest and Great Lakes, moderate days with cooling trend. Highs in the 60s. Nights could drop into the 30s by day 3. Hazard watch. Risk of frost and freeze overnight becomes significant by Saturday night, especially in rural or poorly insulated areas. Cold stress for outdoor workers, livestock, and vulnerable populations. Let's see here. Plains and central United States, dry but trending cooler with increasing wind potential. Hazards to watch out for, possibility of blowing dust in open dry areas if winds pick up, reducing visibility on rural highways. Chillier overnight temperatures may impact agriculture and early outdoor operations. Southwest and desert southwest outlook warmed, daytime highs, clear skies, but cooler at night, especially in desert and higher elevation areas. Elevated fire risk remains in dry brush or grass-covered terrain if winds increase and humidity drops. Early overnight chill may impact crops and outdoor systems. Northwest and Pacific Coast outlook largely dry for the next 3 days. Overnight lows dropping more sharply than daytime hours. In mountain zones, risk of patchy snow or icy travel conditions as nights become significantly colder. Along exposed coastal or elevated sites, gusty wind advisories may be necessary for tree hazard and roadway risk. And here are the top international news highlights from the past 24 hours. Joseph Kony's charges confirmed by International Criminal Court, ICC. The ICC confirmed war crimes and crimes against humanity charges in absentia against Joseph Kony of the Lord's Resistance Army for alleged atrocities including murder, rape, forced pregnancy, and child soldier recruitment between 2002 to 2005. Why it matters: this is a long-running accountability case now reaching a critical milestone, which may trigger renewed efforts for capture and expose weak institutional enforcement in the region. Implications opens reporting angles on regional stability in Uganda, Central Africa, the efficacy of international justice mechanisms, and the gap between indictment and enforcement. Ceasefire deal in Sudan, civil war brokered with a militia group accused of war crimes. A key Sudanese militia group long accused of mass civilian killings agreed to a 3-month ceasefire under international mediation. Why this matters: the ceasefire offers a temporary relief phase in a humanitarian catastrophe, but also raises accountability questions about prior conduct and future enforcement of terms. Journalistic focus: whether the ceasefire terms are enforceable, how aid access will be restored, and how the international community is monitoring violations are something to take into consideration. African states pressed to anchor migration cooperation in human rights, not risk shifting. An international legal migration body urged African countries to base a migration and border cooperation on legality, transparency, and human dignity, warning against being used as offloading zones for risk. I do not understand any of that. ACHPR 85 African states urged to uphold human rights in migration agreements. This is a session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights that took place on October 22nd. There was a panel discussion. So that's what that is. Migration and border policy are major security governance challenges. This call highlights rising scrutiny of how states manage migration and externalize risk. Implications: reporting opportunities around national border agreements, migrant processing centers, and transparency of cooperation with other states. Typhoon Kalmagi lands in Vietnam after hitting The Philippines. The typhoon made landfall in Vietnam following heavy drainage in the Philippines. Flooding, landslide risk, and infrastructure damage are major concerns. This is a major humanitarian and climate risk event with international supply chain, refugee, and relief resilience implications. Useful angles to consider: early impact reporting if you are going to report on this, regional logistics disruptions, possible calls for international aid, and climate adaptation stress in affected zones. Far-right extremist symbolism reported in Germany. Swastikas painted in human blood on public property. In Hanau, Germany, dozens of swastikas were spray painted in human blood on cars. How could they be spray painted in human blood? So the news says that it's human. This report is coming from ABC. In Hanau, Germany, this is just what my report says. Dozens of swastikas were spray painted in human blood on cars, mailboxes, and buildings. Investigators are treating the incident as hate and terror symbolism. This is extremist political violence and symbolism in a developed democratic state, raising concerns about domestic radicalization, security coordination, and hate crime enforcement. If anybody wants to report on this issue, police investigation status, victim and community responses, links to wider extremist networks, and whether the state's counter-extremist apparatus is fully engaged would be things to take into consideration. Historic weather damage in Jamaica from Hurricane Melissa. More than 24 communities remain isolated. Officials in Jamaica say the hurricane damaged over 120,000 structures in the west of the island, cut off some 90,000 families, and left at least 24 communities isolated. Major climate disaster in the Caribbean with implications for relief, logistics, resilience, funding, and international aid coordination. Investigative angles to take, if anybody chooses to report on this issue, would be how quickly relief is arriving, how isolation affects basic services, how government prioritizes recovery, and what risks to regional supply chains or migration exist. This concludes our reporting for today. My name's Waffles. I'll see you guys later. Everybody stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great, and Johnny for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny, and we got the World Cup too. And it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So Johnny, thank you for the World Cup. And everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.